Grozny, January 1995. Russian MVD forces are clearing a building block by block in the kind of close-quarters fighting that reduces every tactical advantage their training promised to rubble. The Chechen defenders have prepared the city with a sophistication that Russian commanders failed to anticipate. Floors collapsed into kill zones, corridors booby-trapped, firing positions cut through walls at angles that standard infantry movement patterns cannot address. In this environment, artillery is counterproductive. The rubble it creates improves the defender's position. Tanks cannot depress their main guns far enough to reach fighters in basements. The AK-74 is excellent, but in a corridor 4 meters wide and 7 meters long, the difference between it and everything else collapses. Among the weapons the MVD's OMON units are carrying through these buildings is something that none of the Chechen fighters on the other side of the next wall have encountered before. It is a pump-action shotgun, officially designated a carbine, that fires around 23 millimeters in diameter. For reference, a standard 12-gauge shotgun shell is nominally 18.5 millimeters wide. This weapon fires a shell 4.5 millimeters wider than that, from a rifled barrel cut down from a rejected anti-aircraft gun, loaded with ammunition that ranges from rubber bullets and tear gas grenades to a solid steel slug capable of destroying a car's engine block at 100 meters. When Chechen fighters overran Russian positions during the battle, and they did repeatedly, capturing weapons, vehicles, and equipment throughout both the 1994 to 1996 and 1999 to 2000 campaigns. The KS-23 was among the items they recognized as uniquely useful, not because they had briefings on its capabilities, because they encountered what it did to reinforce doors, enclose spaces, and they understood immediately that anything capable of that in a building was worth more than almost anything else available on the battlefield. This is the KS-23, the weapon that Russia's prison service created from aircraft gun barrels that failed quality control, that became the most versatile close-quarters weapon system of the post-Soviet era, and that most of the world has never heard of. The story of the KS-23 begins not with a weapons requirement, but with a procurement failure, and the specific Soviet institutional response to that failure that turned a waste problem into a weapons program. The G-23 is a twin-barreled 23mm autocannon designed by Gryazev and Shipunov, fitted to Soviet military aircraft including the Mi-G-23 fighter and the Su-25 ground attack aircraft. It is an effective weapon. The 23mm round it fires at high velocity is the same basic caliber as the ZSU-23 4 Shilka's anti-aircraft cannon armament, and the G-23's barrels are manufactured to the precise tolerances that high-velocity cannon fire requires. Some of those barrels, however, failed quality control inspection, manufacturing flaws in the rifling or dimensions that made them unsuitable for the sustained high-pressure firing an aircraft autocannon generates. These barrels were not useless. They were rejected for one specific application and were otherwise intact steel tubes with rifled interiors of 23mm in diameter. In 1971, the Soviet Ministry of Internal Affairs, the MVD, the ministry responsible for internal security, police forces, and the prison system, issued a requirement for a new weapon to suppress disturbances in prisons. The Soviet prison system, by the early 1970s, managed a population that included not only ordinary criminals, but political prisoners, former military personnel, and the hardened survivors of Soviet labor camps. A population that posed genuine physical threats during riots and required a weapon capable of non-lethal crowd control at meaningful range while also providing lethal capability when situations escalated. Standard police weapons could not reliably project tear gas or non-lethal projectiles to the distances required in large prison yards. The AK-74 was effective at killing, but offered nothing between unarmed authority and lethal force. The requirement specified accuracy sufficient to hit a 50 times 50 centimeter target at 100 to 150 meters, a precision demand that immediately separated the intended weapon from ordinary riot tools. The Design Bureau, TNIITOHMASH, the Central Research Institute for Precision Machine Building, the same facility that designed the PSM pistol, was tasked with the project. Their first attempt was the SSK-26, an experimental smoothbore pump-action shotgun for 4-gauge ammunition using an unusual forward-back pumping mechanism and a detachable box magazine. The IMFDB documentation of the KS-23's development history records the verdict on the SSK-26 directly. It was not found to be satisfactory of fire. The smoothbore barrel could not stabilize projectiles adequately for the accuracy requirement at 100 to 150 meters. The solution was a rifled barrel, and the rejected G-23 cannon barrels in storage were exactly the right diameter. The rejected barrels were cut down to approximately 510 millimeters, about 20 inches, and machined to reduce their outer diameter and weight while preserving the rifled bore. The Grokipedia analysis of the barrel's technical specifications confirms that the rifling features 10 grooves with a right-hand twist, providing stabilization for slug projectiles and improving long-range accuracy with canister ammunition such as tear gas grenades. The barrels, unsuitable for the sustained 23mm cannon fire of a fighter aircraft, were entirely adequate for the lower chamber pressures generated by shotgun-type shells at shotgun velocities. The weapon built around them was officially designated the KS-23 Karabin Specjalny, Special Carbine, the carbine designation reflecting the Russian legal and military classification of any firearm with a rifled barrel regardless of its ammunition type. Development ran from 1971 through 1975, when SES NIIT Toxmash took over the project, and the first serial production guns appeared in 1981. The Soviet police adopted the weapon in 1985, the year usually cited in most sources as its formal entry into service, although the handwiki.org engineering entry on the KS-23 citing Russian firearms documentation gives the joint development between NIS Petstechniki and SES NIIT Toxmash as beginning in 1971 with acceptance in 1985. The 10-year gap between early prototypes and full-service adoption reflects the parallel development of the ammunition suite. A weapon this unconventional required an entire ecosystem of purpose-built rounds before it could be fielded meaningfully. The mechanical design of the KS-23 draws explicitly on the Winchester Model 1200. The IMFDB documentation states this directly, describing the guns as mechanically based on that American pump action. The modernfirearms.net analysis is somewhat more precise, describing the design as noticeably similar to the Winchester Model 1300, the 1300 being a 1978 redesignation of the same platform. Either way, the operating principle is a manually cycled pump action with a rotating bolt locked by 4 lugs. The forearm, the sliding handguard that cycles the action, is made of polymer. The bolt carrier reciprocates on its guide rods when the forearm is worked, ejecting the spent case and chambering the next round from the underbarrel tubular magazine. The trigger is single action. The manual safety is a cross-bolt button in front of the trigger guard. The standard KS-23 has a fixed wooden stock with a rubber recoil pad, and given what the weapon fires, the recoil pad is not cosmetic. A 23mm shell, even at the relatively modest velocities of a riot weapon, is a substantial projectile event. The overall length reaches 1040 millimeters, the barrel 510 millimeters, and the weapon unloaded weighs 3.85 kilograms. The tubular magazine under the barrel holds 3 rounds with 1 in the chamber, giving a total capacity of 4. That number seems modest against the high-capacity magazines of contemporary tactical firearms, but the context of the KS-23's employment makes it logical. Each of those 4 rounds can be a different type of ammunition, and in the scenarios for which the weapon was designed, the first round usually decided the engagement. Before we get into the ammunition system, which is genuinely the heart of what makes the KS-23 extraordinary, and what that ammunition system means in the specific tactical environment of Grozny's destroyed buildings, if the depth of research in this channel is what keeps you here, subscribe now. It takes one click and makes more content like this possible. Let's talk about what you can actually load into a 23mm chamber. The KS-23's ammunition catalog represents a design philosophy that no other shoulder-fired weapon system has matched at its caliber. The modern firearms.net technical documentation of the full round list provides the clearest picture. At the lethal end, the shrapnel 10, a buckshot round with a 10-meter effective range designed for the absolute closest encounters where the priority is immediate incapacitation. The shrapnel 25, a buckshot round extending that effective range to 25 meters, and the Barricade, a cartridge containing a solid steel projectile which can easily destroy an engine block at ranges of up to 100 meters. That last specification deserves a pause. A shoulder-fired weapon, pump action, carried by a single person, weighing under 4 kilograms, that can defeat the engine block of a motor vehicle at 100 meters. This is not a claim made about any 12-gauge shotgun slug. The combination of the 23mm bore, the solid steel projectile, and the rifled barrel stabilization produces terminal ballistics that genuinely belong in a different category from conventional shotgun capability. At the less lethal end, the Volna R, a rubber ball cartridge with a minimum safe range of approximately 40 meters. Closer than that, the modern firearms.net analysis notes it can cause serious body damage or death, and a maximum effective range of about 70 meters. The Strela 3, a cartridge with a less lethal plastic bullet. The Cheremuka 7, Bird Cherry 7, a tear gas grenade loaded with CN agent with a maximum effective range of 100 to 150 meters and a gas cloud volume of approximately 50 cubic meters per round. The Siren 7, Lilac 7, its CS gas equivalent. The Zvezda, a flashbang round, a blank cartridge designated PV-23 used to launch additional types of projectiles with the addition of muzzle adapter assemblies. The muzzle adapter system itself reflects the weapon's modular design philosophy. 2 add-on muzzle mortars were developed, the 36mm Nasadka 6 and the 82mm Nasadka 1-2, fitted to the front of the weapon and fired using the PV-23 blank. These launchers project a tear gas grenade to distances appropriate for their respective calibers. The 82mm mortar attachment transforms the KS-23 into a crew-served class area denial weapon for a single operator. No other shoulder weapon in the MVDs or any other comparable security forces inventory offered this spectrum of capability in a single platform. The specific physics that made the KS-23 effective in enclosed spaces, the tactical environment of a prison block, a barricaded room, or a cleared building in Grozny, begin with the bore diameter. A 23mm bore is simply enormous. The 12-gauge shotgun, which is 18.5mm, is already considered a large bore weapon by the standards of military small arms. A 23mm bore has a cross-sectional area approximately 55% larger than a 12-gauge bore. Every round type that moves through that bore carries proportionally more material, more buckshot pellets in the shrapnel rounds, a larger gas grenade body in the Cheremuka 7, a heavier rubber ball in the Volna R, the 50 cubic meter gas cloud that a single Cheremuka 7 round produces is not achievable from a 12-gauge equivalent. It fills a medium-sized room entirely from a single shot at a range where the operator can stand well back from the door. The rifled barrel adds the dimension that distinguishes the KS-23 from every other riot weapon available to the MVD. A smoothbore barrel is perfectly adequate for close-range buckshot. The shot pattern spreads naturally without stabilization assistance. But a tear gas grenade, a solid slug, or a rubber ball projectile that needs to reach 100 to 150 meters with consistent accuracy, cannot be launched from a smoothbore barrel at those distances. The rifling stabilizes the projectile's flight in the same way a rifle's rifling stabilizes a bullet, allowing the Cheremuka 7 grenade to arc accurately to its target at 150 meters, rather than tumbling and impacting unpredictably. The accuracy requirement the MVD specified in 1971, a 50 times 50 centimeter target at 100 meters, was achievable only with this barrel type, and the rejected aircraft cannon barrels provided it essentially for free, since they already existed and were already rifled. The KS-23M Drozd Thrush variant addressed the weapon's primary tactical limitation in close-quarters environments. The standard KS-23's 1,040 mm overall length was manageable in open prison yards and outdoor scenarios, but was genuinely awkward in confined spaces like corridors, stairwells, and vehicle interiors. Development of the KS-23 million began in October 1990, and 25 carbines were submitted for testing on December 10, 1991, timing that places the requirements squarely in the context of the Soviet Union's final years, when internal security forces were anticipating exactly the kind of urban civil disturbances that the collapse would generate. The KS-23 million shortened the barrel to 350 mm and replaced the fixed wooden stock with a detachable wire folding stock and a polymer pistol grip. Overall length without the stock fitted drops to 650 mm, compact enough to operate in a vehicle, clear a narrow stairwell, or deploy through a doorway without the barrel preceding the operator into the room. The Chechen context of the KS-23's combat employment requires the most careful treatment in this script, because it is where the difference between documented fact and reasonable inference matters. What is confirmed across multiple sources? The KS-23 was used by MVD forces, specifically OMON and SOBAR special police units, during both Chechen wars. The Grokipedia analysis of the weapons service history states directly that the MVD integrated the KS-23 into OMON and SOBAR for close quarters control and breaching roles. The Namu Wiki documentation of the weapon, drawing on Korean-language Russian military sources, states explicitly that it was not simply used as a riot gun to suppress riots, but was also used for killing during the Chechen War, and that the KS-23 with long barrel and fixed stock, distinct from the shorter-barreled prison variant, was specifically the version deployed in the Chechen conflict. What is confirmed about Chechen fighters and captured equipment? Throughout both wars, Chechen forces seized Russian weapons and equipment on a substantial scale. The warhistory.org account of the First Chechen War documents that by 1994, Chechen forces had control of more than 80% of all weaponry and equipment left behind, when Russian forces evacuated Chechnya in 1992, including 42 tanks and over 24,000 automatic weapons. During the fighting itself, weapons were captured in every engagement where Russian forces were overrun, which happened frequently, particularly in the opening months of the First Chechen War, the Battle of Grozny, in January 1995. The urban catastrophe that cost the 131st Mykop Brigade most of its men and equipment produced enormous quantities of captured Russian weapons. The New World Encyclopedia account of the First Chechen War records that on March 6, 1996, between 1,500 and 2,000 Chechen fighters infiltrated Grozny and overran much of the city, capturing caches of weapons and ammunition. The title of this episode claims that Chechen fighters wanted to capture the KS-23. That framing reflects a reality that the tactical logic of the weapon in that environment makes self-evident. A weapon that could project tear gas to 150 meters, fire a solid slug through vehicle engine blocks, deliver a 50 cubic meter gas cloud into a room from a safe distance, or deploy buckshot at 25 meters was precisely the kind of multi-role, close-quarters tool that the guerrilla defenders of Grozny's rubble districts needed. The Chechen defenders of both battles of Grozny were sophisticated, tactically adaptive fighters who understood quickly what any given weapon could do. A weapon that MVD Special Forces valued for building, clearing, and breach operations was, by definition, a weapon that their adversaries in those same buildings would value equally. The comparison to conventional alternatives clarifies the KS-23's specific value. A Russian 12-gauge Saiga shotgun, the semi-automatic magazine-fed alternative that was eventually designated to replace the KS-23 in some Russian ground forces roles, fires around 4.5 mm narrower than the KS-23's 23 mm from a smoothbore barrel, without the tear gas capability, without the Barricades engine block slug, and without the muzzle mortar adapters. It is a better firearm for engaging multiple human targets rapidly with buckshot. It is not comparable as a room clearance gas delivery system, a vehicle stopping tool, or a precision tear gas projector at 150 meters. The KS-23's caliber and the rifled barrel are not compensating for limitations. They are the specific engineering choices that enable capabilities the Saiga cannot replicate. The American combat shotgun, available to the MVD's adversaries in any Cold War scenario, the Mossberg 500 or Remington 870 that NATO forces used, are excellent pump-action 12-gauge weapons with long service records. Against the KS-23's Barricades slug at 100 meters, they have no equivalent. Against the KS-23's Sheramuka 750 cubic meter gas cloud at 150 meters, they have no equivalent. Against the KS-23's 82 mm mortar attachment, capable of area denial gas deployment at longer range still, they have nothing remotely comparable. The KS-23 was not competing with conventional combat shotguns. It occupied a tactical space that conventional shotguns, by their design constraints, could not enter. The two muzzle mortar adapters, the Nasadka 6 at 36 mm and the Nasadka 1-2 at 82 mm, deserve specific examination because they transform the weapon's tactical character entirely at the moment of deployment. In its base configuration, the KS-23 is a room-clearing and close-quarters tool for individual operators or small teams, with the Nasadka 1-2 fitted and a PV-23 blank in the chamber. The same weapon that a single soldier carries becomes an 82 mm mortar equivalent for tear gas projection. The munitions launched through the 82 mm adapter represent genuine area denial capability, the kind of effect typically achieved by crew-served weapons. An OMON team clearing a building with KS-23s has in the same weapon the full spectrum from close-range rubber bullets to medium-range buckshot to long-range gas grenades to mortar-class area denial. No logistics change, no additional weapon system. The same pump-action shotgun that its operator has been carrying through the stairwells. The production status and unit cost of the KS-23 are, as the 1945.com analysis notes, effectively unknown publicly. The weapon was never exported widely. The Gun Wiki fandom entry confirms that no other country was reported to have used the KS-23 in significant numbers, with some former Soviet republics having KS-23s in their arsenals. Armenia, Kazakhstan's prison service, Uzbekistan's customs service, Ukraine, Vietnam, and North Korea appear in various source listings as limited users, but the weapon never proliferated beyond the Soviet sphere in the way that, for instance, the RPG-7 or the AK-74 did. This obscurity is partly structural. The 23 x 75 mm R cartridge is proprietary to the KS-23 and has no commercial market, so a country adopting the weapon also adopts an ammunition supply chain that exists only within former Soviet industrial networks. A weapon that costs nothing to operate if you have the ammunition supply chain already in place, and is essentially impossible to sustain without it. The U.S. import history of the KS-23 is its own compressed story. 30 civilian market variants. The TOZ-123 Drake. 4. A smoothbore version chambered in standard 4-gauge rather than the proprietary 23x75 mmR were imported to the United States before the Clinton administration banned the importation of Russian firearms. The Gun Wiki fandom documentation records this precisely. 30 of these guns were imported as the BFG, one before the ban. 30 guns. In a country where millions of firearms are sold annually, 30 examples of the most powerful shoulder-fired shotgun ever produced in series entered the market, and then the pipeline closed permanently. The result is a collector's item of extraordinary rarity and, in firearm circles, near mythological status. The 1945.com article noting the weapon's U.S. ban status quotes the firearms reviewer Blacktail directly. The unit cost and production status of the KS-23 are effectively unknown, to say nothing of its availability. The KS-23 remains in service with Russian border guards and internal security forces. The Grokipedia analysis of its current deployment notes its continued use for riot control and perimeter defense, and specifically documents border guard units using the Barricades solid slug round against smuggling attempts or fleeing suspects. A vehicle-stopping application that exploits exactly the capability that makes the weapon's anti-material credentials legitimate. At 100 meters, the Barricade round destroys engine blocks. That application had been tested at the MVD level before either Chechen war began, which is partly why OMON units carried the weapon into Grozny. They had spent years learning what a 23mm solid steel projectile could do to structures, vehicles, and reinforced doors in enclosed environments, and they understood the value of that in a city built of concrete and rubble. The Saiga 12K, which has progressively replaced the KS-23 in some Russian formations, is a better general-purpose shotgun. Faster to reload, larger magazine capacity, semi-automatic rather than pump action. Chambers a universally available cartridge. Against human targets in the open at combat shotgun ranges, the Saiga is the better tool. Against everything else, the vehicle, the reinforced door, the defended room requiring gas at 150 meters, the necessity for area denial at mortar-class ranges from a shoulder weapon, the KS-23 has no direct replacement. The weapon it made possible by repurposing failed anti-aircraft gun barrels has a capability profile that 60 years of shotgun development in the Western world has not produced an equivalent to. Return to Grozny, 1995. The MVD-OMON unit, working through the building, the KS-23 in the hands of one of their operators, a reinforced door at the end of the corridor. What happens next is a function of what round is in the chamber, whether the operator wants gas before entry, buckshot on entry, or a slug through the door itself before any approach. The weapon allows the choice. No other shotgun anywhere in the world allows the same choice from the same platform. The Chechen fighters who encountered what the weapon could do and recognized its value were not making an error in judgment. They were making the correct assessment. A tool that delivers that range of effect in a built environment is exactly as valuable as the circumstances suggest it is. The KS-23's obscurity is a function of its specificity and its supply chain, not of its capability. In the specific environment it was designed for, enclosed spaces, reinforced structures, the need for graduated force from non-lethal to vehicle stopping in a single platform, it has never been surpassed. That is the KS-23, not forgotten by the people who used it in the buildings of Grozny, forgotten by everyone who wasn't there.